So we have finally been able to see all of the spells that will be available in Hogwarts Legacy. After hours of going through the early access footage, gameplay showcase footage, and scrolling through Harry Potter lore pages, I've been able to figure out what pretty much every spell that we see on this list is going to be within Hogwarts Legacy. So let's jump into it and see what spells we're going to be able to play with. Now, if you haven't seen my video on the combat system, I explained that at the time we knew there were different types of spells, which we knew were force spells, control spells, damage spells, and obviously the dark art spells. Now, since we got the early game access footage, we can see that there are actually more spells than we initially thought, and more types of spells. Therefore, added to our roster are going to be the essential spells we have access to. We're going to have what I'm calling environmental spells, and also transfiguration spells, which seem to have something to do with the Room of Requirement. Let's start with our essential spells, which are going to be at the core of our very basic combat, world exploration, and also the ancient magic that our character is in tune with. The first spell is going to be Flipendo, the basic attack that we see being used throughout most of the combat. The spell directly next to that is Revelio, which is the revealing spell. This is a very core part of the gameplay, whether it be for exploration to find hidden secrets, or whether it be used as a scanning mechanic to see different lootable objects, different mission objectives, or enemies in the local vicinity. The shield spell icon is for Protego, our basic protection spell, which grants this shield around us, protecting us from incoming fire. But sometimes blocking isn't enough and you want to fire an attack back at them, and that counter-attack spell is Stupefy, which we see next to it. Going down to the second row then, you can see what I believe is Oppungo. Now, Oppungo is a spell that allows you to move objects, and we can see it being used throughout the gameplay footage using that R1 button to launch different objects at the enemies. From scanning the slotable spell list that we see on the right here, there doesn't seem to be one that would make sense for Oppungo, therefore it will be an essential spell, and this one makes the most sense. Directly next to that, we see the symbol for our ancient magic, which therefore I believe is going to govern our ancient magic abilities. If you're unsure what ancient magic is and how it works within Hogwarts Legacy, head to my Combat Explained video where I go into detail on exactly that. Next to that though, which we can see being locked now but we know is unlocked during some of the missions, is Alohomora, the unlocking spell. Now, the unlocking system within this game has a very interesting mechanic, similar to how you might have something like in Skyrim where you do the pick locks. This has a magical version of that, which creators have said it seems to be a little bit hard to figure out, but I don't think it'll be too challenging once you get the hang of it. Now, last but not least is Petrificus Totales, the immobilizing stun spell, which we've only seen being used within the camouflage mechanic of the game, which we'll get to in a moment. Next up are the control spells, which have to do with the movement of your opponents. Now, we all know the Leviosa spell, which levitates enemies up from the ground, causing them to be airborne, and sets up a lot of our combos that you've seen without the combat footage. The first of the control spells though seems to be one that we don't know too much about, however we did see footage of it being used within the second gameplay showcase during the Dark Arts Arena battle. I think this spell is going to be Immobulus, the immobilizing spell. Some people say they think it might be Arresto Momentum, which is a slowing spell. However, I think it aligns more with Immobulus, which we see Hermione use against the Pixies due to the instant stop of the motion as opposed to a slow falling, which Arresto Momentum would give. The next spell I think is going to be Glacius, which is the ice freezing spell, which immobilizes enemies with that frost effect. Whilst we haven't seen any in-game actual combat footage of this, we have seen it be used in one of the previews against this troll, and given the icy effect and the icon design, I think therefore it will be Glacius. The last spell though, I'm not actually 100% sure what this one could be. Having a look at it and comparing it to some of the other spells within the category, it is a little bit unclear exactly what the image is depicting, as we know that the control, force and damage spells should have an effect on enemy opponents as well as just the environment. So if you have an idea of what you think this might be, let me know in the comments down below and we can all share and see if we can figure out what it might be. The force spells are up next though, and these govern your standard push, pulls and spins. From what we've seen, the first spell is Accio, the pull spell, which will bring enemies or objects closer to you. The second is its counterpart Dipulso, which will push them further away. The third, by icon, looks like Descendo, which will slam enemies or objects down to the ground. The last spell we haven't really seen, but given its icon, I think it's going to be Circumrota, the rotation spell, which will spin enemies or objects that it hits. You can also kind of see it a little bit in this footage, as I think that might be what this spell is. Now for the damage spells. Kicking us off is Confringo, the Explosion Curse, which we've been able to see used a little bit through the early game access, and seems like one of the more powerful spells that we have access to on this roster. Next is Diffindo, the Slashing spell, which we've been able to see used during the Dark Arts preview. Next up is everyone's favourite Voldemort defeating disarming spell Expelliarmus, which apparently is strong enough to combat the unholy Avada Kedevra itself.
But your way.
Now the next spell is a little bit unknown. It could be Reducto, the destruction spell. However, we've seen from one of the ancient magic abilities that that might be what is used as one of them. We've also seen an ancient magic ability be used as Ridiculous, turning an enemy into a small little goblin chicken thing, which is kind of weird. But it's a little bit unclear whether the ancient magic abilities have direct links to actual spells or whether there's something entirely. Therefore it could be Reducto, but if not, I think it'll be Bombarda, which is a slightly weaker explosion spell than Confringo we spoke about earlier. And lastly, we have our basic damage spell, which is Incendio. We've seen it used through a lot of the early game combat and is the fire spell. Now we get onto the area of spells I've named the environmental spells because of how they integrate with the actual environment around you. First up, to camouflage ourselves and start off the basic stealth mechanics within the game, we have the Disillusionment Charm. This gives us a kind of invisibility mechanic and also gives us access to the Petrificus Totales spell which we spoke about, which is that stunning spell which again seems only activatable when in this stealth mechanic. Next up is Lumos, which puts a little bit of light at the end of your wand to light up dark places, but also seems to be used within certain puzzles within the game. Thirdly, we have Reparo, which will repair different objects and structures from around the world, and I imagine will be very key with certain puzzles we might experience. And lastly, we have Mystery Spell number 2, which again, after a lot of research, I haven't quite been able to get a good answer for this one. The icon itself is a little bit ambiguous, so if you have any ideas, let me know down in the comments below. Now for the Transfiguration spells, which actually stumped me for ages trying to figure out where we could have seen these, but I was focusing so much on the combat that I completely missed over the Room of Requirement, which is where we can see all three of these spells being used. Now the developers might have taken some creative liberty with these ones, as I don't see any names within the lore that really match up with what these spells do, with the exception of Evanesco, which is the Vanishing spell. These three spells though control your customization within the Room of Requirement and Vivarium outside. The first seeming to give access to the different conjurations that you can put within your space, the second giving you the option to move or edit these, and the third deleting or vanishing those different objects from the space as well. The last set of spells then that we have access to are of course the big bad 3 Unforgivable Curses. The first of these is obviously Avada Kedevra, the Killing Curse, which, although has been said a lot of times throughout the films, only has one true superior pronunciation. Next up is Curcio, the Torture Curse, which gives a bit of a stun and damage over time mechanic when you use it against an opponent, which ever so slightly different therefore from our more forgivable curses, which just give us that stun. Curcio will give us the damage element as well. And lastly is the Imperious Curse, Imperio, which in this game gives you the power to alter different opponents' minds so they fight for you for a limited time. Now we don't know what the consequences of using any of these 3 Unforgivable Curses might be, but we can be sure it'll be interesting. That then guys is all the spells that we're going to have access to within Hogwarts Legacy. Let me know which one your favourite is down in the comments below, and if you're looking for a little bit more of an in-depth guide to how the combat is going to work, check out this video, or if you want to see about the secret fight club within Hogwarts Legacy, try this one out.